You know, it is a really fascinating quirk of the modern human experience that if you buy a new smartphone or, I don't know, a laptop or really any piece of moderately complex technology, it comes with a user manual.
Right, yeah. It has instructions.
Exactly, instructions. It has troubleshooting guides. It has entire online forums dedicated to gently walking you through what to do when the system glitches out,
Mm.
or when the battery drains too fast, or the software just unexpectedly
You
crashes.
literally just reboot it.
Yeah, you reboot it. We accept that complex systems occasionally just need a hard reset. We offer them patience. But then, you look at the human mind, which is arguably the most complex, infinitely dense, overwhelmingly intricate system in the known universe. And we offer it absolutely zero grace.
Not at all.
Zero. We expect it to run at 100% capacity, without glitches, without battery drain, just perpetually. And when it doesn't, like when we feel tired or when we make a mistake, we don't consult a gentle troubleshooting guide. We just immediately panic and we turn inward with an astonishing level of hostility.
It's so true. It's almost like a reflexive anger.
Right, and that hostility is exactly what the brief but honestly incredibly radical source text we're unpacking today is trying to dismantle. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today we're taking a piece of writing that looks, at first glance, like a gentle collection of reminders about self-compassion and mindfulness, and we are going to look at why these concepts are actually terrifying to the modern brain.
Terrifying is a really good word for it, actually.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the mission here isn't just to read comforting words to you. We want to put our own biological and psychological habits under a microscope. We need to figure out exactly why you and I and everyone we know treats our own minds with a level of aggression that we wouldn't accept from our worst enemies.
It's the perfect starting point, really, because the way we treat ourselves didn't just develop in a vacuum. I mean, we live in an era heavily defined by what historians call Taylorism.
Taylorism, remind me what that is.
Yeah, so it's the scientific management of labor from the early 20th century. It was all about making factories more efficient by timing every single movement of a worker, like down to the second.
Wow, okay. So optimizing human beings like literal cogs in a machine.
Exactly. And over the last century, we haven't just kept Taylorism in the factory. We've completely internalized it. We've applied it to the human soul, essentially. We live in a world of constant, relentless optimization.
Oh, totally. I mean, you've got wearable technology that gamifies your REM sleep,
Right. Apps that color code your daily productivity.
algorithms tracking your heart rate variability.
Yes. We are just surrounded by this culture of hyper-efficiency. And unconsciously, we begin to apply those exact same ruthless mechanical efficiency metrics to our own emotional well-being. We expect our healing from, say, a breakup or a job loss to follow a linear, upward trending graph.
Like a stock market chart that only goes up.
Exactly. We expect our personal growth to be optimized for maximum output.
Yeah.
So when this text steps in and says, don't judge yourself too quickly, it is actually proposing a massive fundamental disruption to our modern conditioning. It's asking us to step outside of the optimization machine.
Right, which feels completely counterintuitive because, I mean, if I'm not optimizing, what am I doing? Stagnating.
That's the fear. That is the exact fear.
That's the fear. The text hits this immediately by confronting the trap of quick judgment and how we totally misinterpret the basic signals our bodies and minds send us. It gives this very clear directive, don't judge yourself too quickly. And then it lists three very specific misinterpretations.
Yeah, 3 scenarios.
Right. It says, just because you are tired today does not mean you are weak. Just because you made a mistake does not mean you are a failure. And just because you are moving slowly does not mean you are not growing. I want to look at the sheer velocity of that leap.
What's fascinating here is the absolute nature of that leap.
Right. The leap from I am tired to I am weak. I make that jump in a fraction of a millisecond. Why? Why does my brain completely bypass logic and go straight to character assassination?
To understand that, we really have to look at the neurobiology of how the brain processes threat, specifically focusing on the amygdala and a network called the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DM.
Right.
Yeah.
So evolutionarily, we are wired with a negativity bias. If our early hominid ancestors were walking through the savannah and heard a rustle in the bushes, the ones who thought, oh, that's probably just the wind, well, they got eaten by a predator.
So they didn't pass on their chill, relaxed genes.
Exactly. They were wiped out. The ones who instantly leap to the catastrophic conclusion that is a threat that will destroy my existence, they survive to pass on their genes. Our brains are survival machines. They are not happiness machines.
Okay, so bringing that back to feeling tired.
Right. So when you feel tired, Your physiological battery is low. In a prehistoric context, low energy means you are vulnerable to predators. It is literally a state of threat. Your amygdala registers this vulnerability, hits the panic button, and your default mode network, which is responsible for your sense of self and your internal narrative, it instantly spins up a catastrophic story to force you into action.
Oh, wow. So I am tired, which is just a neutral data point, instantly becomes I am weak, which is a full-blown identity crisis.
Yes, because an identity crisis releases cortisol and adrenaline, which artificially wakes you up and forces you to stay vigilant. It's a survival tactic.
Okay, hold on. Let me push back on that for a second, because that sounds like a feature, not a bug. If my brain is releasing cortisol to keep me alert when I'm tired, isn't that a good thing? Like, if I drop the ball at work or I make a massive mistake on a project, leaping to I am a failure gives me that jolt of anxiety that ensures I double-check my work the next time. Doesn't this harsh self-judgment actually drive high performance?
It drives short-term survival, yes, but it destroys long-term performance. And that's where the science gets really fascinating.
Okay, how so?
Well, when you leap to I am a failure, you are activating the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, or freeze response. Yes, you get a quick spike of cortisol. But chronic cortisol exposure literally shrinks the hippocampus.
Really? It actually shrinks it.
Literally shrinks the physical volume of it over time, yes. And the hippocampus is the part of the brain responsible for learning and memory. It also impairs the prefrontal cortex, which handles executive function and complex problem solving.
So the exact tools I need to fix the mistake.
Exactly. So by weaponizing a temporary mistake into a permanent identity flaw, by saying I am a failure, you are actually shutting down the exact neural pathways you need to analyze the mistake, learn from it, and do better next time. You are blinding yourself with biochemical panic. The text says, don't judge yourself too quickly, because the speed of the judgment is the problem. It bypasses the rational prefrontal cortex entirely and hands the steering wheel directly to the panicked amygdala.
So the speed of the judgment traps us in a biological panic room. That changes how I view this entirely. Because, instead of using the old analogy of a broken car dashboard where the check engine light comes on and you don't just throw the whole car away, I think a better way to look at this is through the lens of a computer compiling complex software code.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, think about it. When a computer is compiling a massive program, what happens? The CPU usage spikes to like 99%. The fans spin up and sound like a jet engine.
The whole thing gets incredibly hot.
Yes. And if you try to open a web browser, the mouse lags, the screen stutters, and the whole system moves incredibly slowly. If you didn't know anything about computers, you would look at that machine and say, this thing is broken, it's failing, it's useless.
But it's not broken at all.
Right. It is executing an incredibly resource-intensive, vital background process. The slowness isn't a sign of failure. It is proof of deep structural work. When the text says just because you are moving slowly does not mean you are not growing, it's basically telling us that our internal software is compiling.
Yeah, it is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The slowness is the biological cost of integration. When you are moving slowly, maybe you are recovering from a period of intense burnout, or you are trying to learn a completely new skill set, or even just navigating a complex emotional transition, your cognitive and emotional CPU is maxed out.
You're doing heavy lifting.
Exactly, heavy subconscious lifting. If you judge that slowness as a failure, you are basically violently yanking the power cord out of the wall while the system is updating. You corrupt the very growth you are trying to achieve.
Which is so dangerous.
It is, because hustle culture tells us that velocity is the only valid metric of progress. We equate visible speed with intrinsic value, but neuroplasticity, the actual physical rewiring of your brain, requires deep rest, slow integration, and periods of seeming inactivity.
Which perfectly explains why trying to rush past our own exhaustion always makes us feel so much worse. But if we know this logically, why don't we stop? I mean, if our system is compiling and we feel slow and tired, why is our instinct to immediately look around at everyone else and use them as a weapon against ourselves?
The social comparison trap.
Exactly, because that's where the source material goes next. It pivots from our internal misinterpretations to the cruelty of comparison. The text points out a very specific, very toxic habit. It says, you compare your worst days to someone else's best moments.
Which is an unwinnable equation.
Completely unwinnable. And as a result, the text says we blame ourselves for not being stronger, and we literally punish ourselves for needing time to heal. It's not just judgment anymore. It escalates to active punishment.
The escalation to punishment is driven by social comparison, which is a deeply, deeply ingrained psychological drive. Back in the 1950s, Leon Festinger proposed social comparison theory.
I've heard of that. What's the core idea?
It basically posits that humans have an innate drive to evaluate themselves, and in the absence of objective measures, we evaluate ourselves by comparing ourselves to others. It's how we figure out where we stand in the tribe.
Right. Am I doing okay? Let me look at the guy next to me.
Exactly.
Hey.
But today, the ecosystem for comparison is fundamentally rigged. We are no longer comparing ourselves to the 50 people in our immediate hunter-gatherer tribe.
Yeah.
We are comparing ourselves to the algorithmically optimized, heavily filtered, selectively edited highlights of 8 billion people on a global stage.
Yeah, you open your phone and you are immediately losing to someone halfway across the world.
Right. You are intimately aware of your own behind-the-scenes reality, the doubts, the fatigue, the messy, unglamorous effort it takes just to get out of bed on a bad day. That is your data set for yourself. But your data set for everyone else is curated perfection. You are comparing your unedited blooper reel to their Oscar-winning trailer. It is asymmetric warfare against your own self-esteem.
Right. But again, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Doesn't comparison sometimes help? Like if I see a colleague just crushing it at work or a friend who just ran a marathon, comparing myself to them can be the kick in the pants I need to get off the couch. Why is the text acting like all comparison is a form of self-punishment?
It's a really vital distinction. Psychology differentiates between upward comparison and downward comparison, but more importantly, between comparison that breeds inspiration and comparison that breeds identity destruction.
Okay, break that down.
So if you look at your colleague and think, wow, they have a great workflow, I should try to adopt some of their strategies. That is productive. It's inspiring. But that isn't what the text is talking about at all. The text says we compare our worst days to their best moments.
Our worst days.
Yes. That specific phrasing indicates a localized, highly vulnerable state of being. Your worst day being violently held up against an impossible standard. When you are already on your worst day, your emotional resources are totally depleted. You don't have the cognitive bandwidth for inspiration. The comparison isn't acting as a motivator. It's acting as a bludgeon. It's what Buddhist psychology refers to as the second dart.
The second dart. I love this concept, but break down exactly how it works mechanically for someone who might be hearing it for the first time.
So in life, pain is inevitable. You experience a setback, a physical illness, a rejection, a failure. That is the first dart. It hits you, it causes genuine pain, and it requires energy to heal. You can't avoid the first dart.
Right. Stuff just happens.
Exactly. But then you look around, you see someone else on Instagram who seems to be handling their life perfectly, and you say to yourself, why am I struggling so much? I shouldn't be this weak. Look at them. They aren't falling apart. I'm completely pathetic for needing time to heal from this.
Oh.
Right. That narrative, that harsh judgment and comparison, that is the second dart. You've taken a dart and stabbed yourself with it. The first dart was unavoidable. The second dart is entirely self-inflicted. And the biological consequence of that second dart is an increase in allostatic load.
Allostatic load. What is that?
It's the physiological wear and tear on your body caused by chronic stress. You are quite literally punishing your nervous system for being injured in the first place. If we connect this to the bigger picture, blaming yourself drains the exact energy you need to recover.
You are punishing the wound for bleeding. If you break your leg, you don't punish your femur for taking 6 weeks to knit back together. You don't look at someone sprinting down the street and scream at your plaster cast for holding you back. You understand that the biological process of healing takes a very specific, non-negotiable amount of time.
Of course. You wouldn't yell at a broken bone.
Yeah. Right. But when it comes to emotional or psychological healing, recovering from burnout, grieving a loss, navigating a massive life transition, we treat the need for recovery time as a personal insult to our productivity. We view vulnerability as a character flaw rather than just a biological reality.
Exactly. And this instinct to punish ourselves reveals a profound discomfort with the lack of control. Healing requires surrender. It requires us to admit that our capacity is temporarily diminished and that we cannot simply willpower our way out of it.
Which is terrifying for a lot of people.
Oh, for high achievers or people who pride themselves on resilience, that surrender feels like death. So the punishment the text describes, the harsh self-talk, forcing ourselves to work when we are exhausted, denying our own pain, is actually a maladaptive control mechanism.
Wow, okay. So it's an illusion of control.
Yes. If I am yelling at myself to be stronger, it creates an illusion that I'm still in the driver's seat. It tricks the brain into feeling proactive. But the reality is, you are just revving the engine while the car is in neutral, burning through whatever fuel you had left.
which leaves you completely stranded. So if the problem is that we are trapped in this cycle of misinterpreted signals, rigged social comparisons, and self-inflicted second darts, how do we break the loop?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. And this is where the source material shifts gears and offers what I honestly think is the most liberating concept of the entire text: radical permission. It strips away all the optimization metrics and grounds us in a fundamental, undeniable truth. It simply says, you are human.
Such a simple phrase, but so heavy.
Yeah. And from that single foundational fact, it grants 3 explicit permissions. You are allowed to feel lost. You are allowed to start again. You are allowed to grow at your own pace. Let's not just gloss over these. I want to dissect each one, starting with you are allowed to feel lost.
Okay, let's do it.
In a modern society where everyone is expected to have a 5-year plan, a 10-year vision board, and a perfectly optimized LinkedIn trajectory, feeling lost is terrifying. Why is the text insisting that disorientation is a right we must claim?
To understand why feeling lost is necessary, we have to look at how the brain maps reality. The hippocampus doesn't just create spatial maps of our physical environment, like how to get from your house to the grocery store. Cognitive scientists believe it also helps create conceptual maps of our lives.
Like our career trajectories of relationships.
Exactly. When you have a clear plan, your cognitive map is solid. You feel safe. But what happens when the map no longer matches the territory? You get a job you thought you wanted, and it makes you miserable. A relationship you thought was permanent suddenly ends. Suddenly, the map you've been relying on is leading you directly into a swamp.
That is a terrible feeling.
It is. But because we equate certainty with safety, our instinct is to just keep walking faster, hoping the map will magically align with reality again. Feeling lost is the deeply uncomfortable, highly vulnerable realization that your current mass is broken. It is a state of severe cognitive dissonance.
So why do we need permission for that?
Because the text grants permission to feel lost. Because, structurally, disorientation is the absolute prerequisite for neurogenesis and the creation of a new map.
Yeah.
You cannot chart new territory if you stubbornly refuse to admit that you don't know where you are.
I think about the concept of wayfinding in deep wilderness survival. If you are hiking in dense woods and you realize you have lost the trail, the absolute worst thing you can do is to just keep sprinting in a random direction out of panic.
Right, you'll just burn calories and get more lost.
Exactly. You'll just get further away from safety and you will exhaust yourself in the process. The first rule of survival is to stop Patty. You have to sit down, admit that you do not know where north is, and let the panic subside. That moment of stopping, that is the permission to feel lost. It feels like giving up, but it is actually the most strategic move you can make.
That's a great analogy. It allows you to gather new data.
Right. It allows the mental dust to settle so you can look at the sun, find a landmark, and begin to reorient. If we don't grant ourselves permission to be lost, we just spend our lives frantically sprinting in the wrong direction, purely for the sake of feeling like we're moving.
And that frantic sprinting is driven by the fear that if we admit we are lost, we might have to start over. Which brings us directly to the text's second permission. You are allowed to start again.
Oh, this one is huge.
It is. In behavioral economics, there is a concept called the sunk cost fallacy. It's our tendency to follow through on an endeavor if we have already invested time, effort, or money into it, whether or not the current costs outweigh the benefits.
Like sitting through a terrible movie just because you paid $15 for the ticket.
Exactly. And we apply this to our lives all the time on a much grander scale. I spent 4 years getting this degree. I can't switch careers now. I've been with this person for 5 years. I can't leave and start over. We view starting again as a penalty, a total erasure of our past efforts. We view it as dropping back to absolute zero.
This is such a massive trap for so many people. Why do we treat starting again as a punishment? Let's take the listener, for example. If you are listening to this right now and you are deeply unhappy in a situation, the fear of wasted time is probably the exact chain keeping you tied to it.
Yes, the fear of losing the investment.
Right. But time is spent regardless. You are going to spend the next 5 years of your life no matter what you do.
Yeah.
You can spend it continuing down a path you already know is a dead end, or you can spend it building a new path. So what does this all mean? Why is it so hard to make that pivot? Because it feels like you're losing everything you built.
It feels that way, but the feeling is based on an illusion. The illusion is that starting again means starting from scratch. You were never starting from scratch.
Say more about that.
When you walk away from a failed business, a toxic relationship, or a creative project that just isn't working, You are not arriving at the new starting line empty-handed. You are arriving with a wealth of data. You are starting with the accumulated wisdom, the honed resilience, the clarity of what you don't want, and the deeply ingrained lessons from the mistakes we talked about earlier. You are starting from a highly advanced position of self-knowledge.
You level up, essentially.
Exactly. The text grants this permission because it recognizes that human development is inherently iterative. We're built to draft, revise, and rewrite. Refusing to start again because of sunk costs is a literal refusal to evolve.
It's the difference between seeing your life as a single, fragile tightrope walk versus seeing it as a massive laboratory where experiments are supposed to fail so you can refine the hypothesis.
I love that, the laboratory mindset.
Right. And that leads perfectly into the third permission, which really acts as the umbrella for the other two. It says you are allowed to grow at your own pace. We touched on the idea of slowness earlier with the software compiling analogy, but this permission makes it deeply personal. It's an aggressive reclamation of our autonomy away from the artificial societal timelines we've been force-fed since birth.
The societal timeline is honestly one of the most oppressive psychological constructs we navigate. Where did these milestones even come from?
Right, like who made the rules?
Exactly. The idea that by 22 you graduate, by 25 you have a career trajectory, by 30 you marry, by 35 you have a mortgage. These are largely post-World War II economic structuring models. They were designed to create a predictable consumer base and a stable workforce. They have absolutely nothing to do with human biology or psychological development.
Wait, really? It's just mid-century economics.
Basically, yes. Yet, we have internalized this macroeconomic blueprint as a moral imperative. We judge our intimate, nuanced, deeply complex individual lives against an assembly line designed for the masses.
That is wild.
Growing at your own pace means acknowledging your specific variables, your childhood context, your genetic predispositions, the specific traumas you've endured, the unique neurological wiring of your brain. None of these fit on an assembly line. When the text says you are allowed to grow at your own pace, it is an invitation to radically accept your own unique trajectory without apologizing to a phantom societal timekeeper.
I think the challenge for the listener right now is to actively grant themselves these permissions.
Right.
Not just intellectually agree with them, but feel the weight of them. Think of an area in your life where you feel behind. Now say it to yourself, I am allowed to feel lost. I am allowed to start again. I am allowed to grow at my own pace.
It's a very different frequency to operate on.
It feels strangely subversive, doesn't it? But if we struggle to find the validity of these permissions within the rigid structures of human society, the text brilliantly suggests we look elsewhere for proof of concept. It tells us to look outside. So if our society has built this artificial timeline for success, where can we look to find a system that actually works? How does the rest of the biological world handle this?
Nature has a very different timeline.
Yeah. The source text provides two incredibly resonant metaphors. It says, a flower does not hate itself because it has not bloomed yet, and the moon does not lose its beauty just because it is not full every night.
We often dismiss metaphors like this as just, poetic fluff. But they are actually pointing to profound ecological and biological truths. Let's look at the science of chronobiology.
Chronobiology.
Yes, it's the study of biological rhythms. Everything in the natural world operates on cycles, phases, and oscillations. The concept of allostasis in biology states that for a system to remain stable, it must be able to change and adapt to its environment. Systems require oscillation. A flat line in biology is literally death.
Wow, so constantly being at peak performance is a flat line.
Exactly. The flower undergoes a highly complex, unseen process. It exists as a dormant seed. It establishes a root system in total darkness. It expends massive energy to break through the soil. And only then, for a brief specific window, does it bloom. The moon is dictated by orbital mechanics, displaying itself in phases from our perspective. Nature is defined by these cycles of dormancy, partial illumination, and brief, spectacular display.
Right, the natural world demands oscillation. But we, as human beings, demand a flat line. We demand a flat line of peak performance. We act like we are made of silicon rather than carbon. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If you take the logic that we apply to our own careers and emotional states, and you apply it to the natural world, the absurdity becomes laughable.
Oh, totally.
Imagine a gardener standing over a patch of dirt in February, just screaming at a dormant rosebush. You are a failure! Look at you, just sitting there in the dirt. You're not producing anything. You are moving too slowly.
We would think the gardener was psychotic.
We'd institutionalize them. Right, because we understand that the wintering phase is biologically mandatory for the spring bloom. Or imagine looking up at a crescent moon and saying, look at that lazy moon. It's only operating at 20% capacity. It's really falling behind the other celestial bodies. What a weak moon.
That's hilarious. But it's exactly what we do to ourselves.
It is. The moon hasn't lost mass. It's just partially in shadow from our vantage point. It is structurally whole. Yet if we were flowers or moons, we would be relentlessly punishing ourselves for not being in a permanent, fixed state of maximum output.
Because we have completely decoupled ourselves from our own biology. The natural metaphor is powerful because it separates inherent worth from the state of completion.
That's a huge point.
The seed has profound value and potential before it ever sees the sun. The crescent moon exerts the exact same gravitational pull on the Earth's tides as a full moon. Its influence is not diminished by its phase. But humans have a bizarre cognitive blind spot where we believe our worth is entirely contingent on our output, our visibility, and our state of completion.
We measure ourselves by our harvest, not our seasons.
Precisely. We view our own periods of wintering, when we are tired, when we are feeling lost, when we need to start over, as systemic failures rather than necessary life-sustaining seasons. The text is urging the reader to remember that you are a natural, biological organism subject to the laws of seasons and cycles. You cannot bloom year-round, and demanding that of yourself is a recipe for biological burnout.
That distinction, separating our inherent worth from our state of completion, is the hinge upon which this entire text turns. It brings us directly to how we must view our own incomplete state. Building on the unbloomed flower and the partial moon, the text states plainly, and you do not lose your worth just because you are still becoming.
It's still becoming. Such a vital phrase.
It is. The actionable advice it then provides is arguably the hardest directive to actually execute. It says, so be gentle with yourself. Give yourself the same kindness you would give to someone you love. Let's stop and look at that phrase, still becoming, because I feel like that phrase is a direct attack on how we view adulthood.
It absolutely is an attack on it. Bisecting the concept of still becoming is critical because it reframes human identity. We culturally view adulthood, or healing, or success as a destination, a finish line.
Like, I made it.
Exactly. We operate under the delusion that one day we will arrive. We will wake up, our trauma will be entirely resolved, our bank accounts will be secure, our relationships will be perfectly balanced, and we will finally be a completed person.
The dream.
But still becoming shatters that illusion. It asserts that human identity is not a noun, it is a verb. It is a dynamic, unending process of integration and evolution. There is no finish line. You will always be in a state of becoming right up until your last breath.
So if you're waiting for the finish line to feel good about yourself,
You'll be waiting forever. If your sense of worth and value is dependent on reaching a final, finished state of perfection, you will never feel valuable, because that state does not exist. The text argues that your worth must be decoupled from the idea of being finished. Your value is inherent in the act of becoming itself, including the messy, slow, mistake-ridden parts of the process.
that makes total intellectual sense. I get it on paper. But applying it, that is where I, and I'm sure most of the people listening, hit a massive concrete wall. The text says to be gentle with yourself and give yourself the same kindness you would give to someone you love. Why is the empathy gap so astronomically wide here?
It's remarkably wide.
Let me give you a very gritty, real-world example. If my absolute best friend calls me in tears and says, I'm so overwhelmed, I totally bombed this presentation at work, I feel like an imposter, and I'm so exhausted I can barely function, my immediate instinctual response is profound compassion. I would say, of course you're exhausted. You've been carrying so much weight. One bad presentation does not erase your entire career. You are brilliant. Take a breath, take the weekend off, I've got you. I wouldn't even have to think about it. The empathy flows naturally.
It's automatic.
Right. But if I bomb that exact same presentation, the internal monologue is vicious and instantaneous. You are an idiot. You have completely exposed yourself. Everyone knows you're a fraud. You're going to get fired. You always do this. Why do I have an infinite well of grace for my friend and a literal firing squad waiting for myself?
The empathy gap you are describing is one of the most widely studied phenomena in modern psychology. Dr. Kristin Neff, who is the leading researcher on self-compassion, has done extensive work on this exact dynamic. The reason the gap exists is rooted in how our brains activate different physiological systems based on the target of our attention.
Okay, so what happens when it's a friend?
When your friend comes to you in distress, your brain activates the mammalian caregiving system. This is an evolutionary system designed to foster social bonding and protect the tribe. When this system is activated, your brain releases oxytocin and endorphins, which make you feel warm, connected, and deeply empathetic. You intuitively know that attacking your friend will not help them survive.
Okay, so why doesn't the mammalian caregiving system turn on when I'm the one who is suffering? Why don't I get the oxytocin?
Because when you are the one who fails, a completely different system activates. The failure triggers the threat defense system we talked about earlier, the amygdala. The brain perceives your own failure not as a call for care, but as an existential threat to your social standing and survival. It releases cortisol and adrenaline.
So I become the threat to myself.
Exactly. And here's where it gets twisted. We have internalized the belief that if we attack ourselves first, if we act as our own cruelest critic, we can somehow preempt the attacks of others and force ourselves to improve. It is a misguided protective mechanism. We believe that self-flagellation is the engine of accountability. We think, if I'm gentle with myself, I'm just letting myself off the hook. I'll become lazy.
Exactly. That is the fear. If I just say, oh, well, I'm still becoming after I drop the ball, aren't I just giving myself a free pass to underperform? Doesn't self-compassion just breed complacency?
That is the most common myth, and the data emphatically disproves it. Dr. Neff's research shows the exact opposite is true. Self-criticism does not drive accountability. It drives avoidance.
Wait, avoidance?
Yes. Think about it mechanically. If you know that making a mistake will result in a vicious, exhausting internal beating, your brain will start to avoid taking risks. You will procrastinate. You will hide your failures rather than learning from them because the psychological cost of admitting fault is too high. Self-criticism paralyzes you.
Wow, that makes so much sense.
Right. Self-compassion, on the other hand, creates a psychologically safe internal environment. If you know that you will treat yourself with kindness when you fail, you are much more likely to take on difficult challenges. You are more likely to admit your mistakes, take responsibility for them, and correct them because your core identity isn't on the line. Self-compassionate people are statistically more accountable, more resilient after setbacks, and much less likely to experience burnout. So when the text says, be gentle with yourself, it isn't telling you to lower your standards. It is telling you to adopt the only psychological framework that actually supports sustained growth.
That completely flips the script. Being gentle isn't weakness. It's the most strategic form of resilience. I want the listener to try a mental audit right now based on this. The next time you make a mistake or you feel tired and that inner critic starts screaming at you, I want you to capture the exact words. Literally write them down on a piece of paper. You are an idiot. You are falling behind.
Just seeing them on paper is usually a shock.
It is. Then imagine looking at the person you deeply, fiercely love the most in this world. Your child, your partner, your best friend. Imagine looking them dead in the eye and speaking those exact words to their face. The physical revulsion you feel just imagining that scenario exposes the sheer cruelty we accept as normal when it is directed inward. We are harboring a hostile entity in our own minds. The text is begging you to evict the harsh critic and replace it with the voice of a friend.
And that replacement requires active, conscious repetition. It's what neuroscientists call self-directed neuroplasticity. The neural pathways of your inner critic are like deeply rutted 8-lane highways in your brain. The electrical signals travel down them effortlessly. The path of self-compassion is like an overgrown trail in the woods you haven't walked down in years.
So it's hard work at first.
Very hard. The first time you try to be gentle with yourself after a mistake, it will feel fake. It will feel incredibly difficult. You have to take out a machete and hack your way through the mental underbrush. But every time you pause, catch the harsh judgment, and consciously replace it with the kindness you would show a friend, you are laying down new myelin on those neural pathways. Over time, the highway of self-criticism degrades from lack of use, and the path of self-compassion becomes the default route. But it requires the daily discipline of radical kindness.
Which brings us to the final and I think the most deeply hopeful section of this source material. We've moved from dismantling the present judgments to securing a promise for the future. The text concludes by addressing the concept of unseen growth and the unfinished story. It offers this ultimate anchoring reassurance to the reader. You are not behind. You are not broken. It explains that instead you are simply learning, healing, and becoming stronger in ways you may not see yet.
This raises an important question, though. How do you trust what you can't see?
Exactly. Let's explore this idea of growth that you may not see yet. Because trusting a process that produces zero visible results is incredibly hard for the human brain. We want the instant gratification.
It is incredibly hard, but it is a fundamental law of development. Let's return to the natural world, specifically looking at the concept of latent learning and subterranean growth. Consider the Chinese bamboo tree.
The bamboo tree, okay.
This is one of the most remarkable phenomena in nature. You can plant a bamboo seed, water it diligently, fertilize the soil, and ensure it gets perfect sunlight. For the first year, you will see absolutely nothing break the surface.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. Year 2, nothing. Year 3, nothing. Year 4, still just a patch of barren dirt. To any external observer, and perhaps the person watering it, it looks like a complete and utter failure. It looks dead.
I would have stopped watering in year 2, honestly.
Most people would. But beneath the surface, that plant is doing something extraordinary. It is developing a massive, complex, deeply entrenched root system that spreads wide and deep into the earth. It is doing the invisible structural work required to support massive growth. And then, in the 5th year, the bamboo shoot finally breaks the surface of the soil, and it can grow up to 90 feet in just 6 weeks.
Wait, what? That is wild. 90 feet in 6 weeks.
Exactly. But the question is, did it grow 90 feet in 6 weeks, or did it grow 90 feet in 5 years?
Oh, wow.
The growth was happening the entire time. It was just happening where no one could see it. Psychological and emotional strengthening operates on the exact same principle. This is tied to a psychological concept known as post-traumatic growth.
Post-traumatic growth. So growing from the hard stuff.
Right. During our hardest times, the times we feel broken, the times we are grieving, the periods where we feel completely lost and are just struggling to survive the day, we assume we are stagnating or regressing. But the reality is that the brain is doing subterranean work. You are building the root system of resilience, deepening your capacity for empathy, and forging a much more profound level of self-knowledge.
So even when it feels like nothing is happening, work is being done.
You may not see the results on the surface yet. You might look at your life and think, I have absolutely nothing to show for this. But the unseen growth is entirely real. And it is the absolute prerequisite foundation for everything that comes next. If you try to force the bamboo to grow before the roots are ready, it'll just topple over at the first gust of wind.
If you had judged the bamboo in year 3, you would have completely misread its potential and probably paved over the dirt. And that thought leads directly into the text's final beautiful instruction. Don't judge yourself by one difficult chapter. Your story is still being written. I want us to expand on this metaphor, moving beyond just a book and looking at how we construct the meaning of our own lives.
In psychology, this aligns perfectly with Dan McAdams' theory of narrative identity. McAdams argues that we don't just experience life as a series of random events. We actively construct a story about who we are, where we came from, and where we are going. We are meaning-making machines. The problem arises when we experience a period of intense struggle, failure, or depression, and we engage in what psychologists call narrative foreclosure.
Narrative foreclosure, meaning we decide the story's over before the book is finished.
Precisely. We take the current difficult chapter, the divorce, the bankruptcy, the period of profound loneliness, and we conclude that this is the final defining truth of our existence. We assume the trajectory of the current chapter is the trajectory of the rest of the book.
Like watching a movie and turning it off when the hero gets defeated and just assuming that's the end.
Exactly. But if you think about the structure of any compelling narrative, whether it is mythology, a great novel, or a film, it absolutely requires a period where all hope seems lost. It's the dark night of the soul. The protagonists must face overwhelming obstacles. They must be stripped of their illusions, and they must feel lost.
If you read a book where the main character succeeds at everything immediately, never experiences hardship, and never has to start again, you would throw the book across the room.
It would be incredibly boring.
It would be entirely devoid of meaning. The difficult chapters, the friction, the mistakes, the slow, agonizing growth are exactly what give the story its depth and its ultimate triumph. But when we are living our own story, we panic. Judging your entire life's trajectory based on a current low point is like closing a book forever in the middle of a tense, heartbreaking scene and declaring the entire book terrible simply because the conflict hasn't resolved yet. When you are inside the difficult chapter, the pain and the fatigue feel all-encompassing. It feels like this is all there is and all there ever will be.
Tunnel vision.
Right, but the text provides the ultimate crucial reminder your story is still being written. You are not a completed manuscript sitting on a dusty shelf. You are a work in progress. You are in a transitional phase. And by recognizing that you are in a chapter rather than at the final conclusion, you reintroduce the possibility of change. The struggle becomes a plot point rather than a permanent destination.
It reintroduces hope, which is biologically necessary to keep moving forward. It allows you to endure the subterranean phase of the bamboo, knowing that the visible growth is coming.
So, as we bring this incredibly deep dive to a close, let's take a moment to synthesize the massive terrain we've covered today. We started by looking at how our brains, wired for survival and conditioned by a culture of hyper-efficiency, trick us into rapid, catastrophic self-judgment. We explored how the leap from a tired body to a weak identity is a biological misfire, and how moving slowly isn't a glitch, but rather the essential process of our internal software compiling. We dismantled the rigged game of social comparison, recognizing the sheer biological toll of throwing the second dart and punishing ourselves for needing the time to heal.
Right. And from there, we stepped into the liberation of radical permission. We saw how feeling lost is the necessary cognitive dissonance required to build a new, better map for our lives. We reframed starting again, not as a penalty of sunk costs, but as an informed, evolved new beginning. And we forcefully rejected the artificial post-war timelines of society in favor of growing at our own unique, biologically authentic pace. We learned from the dormant seed and the waxing moon that nature demands oscillation, and that you do not lose your inherent worth while you are still in the process of becoming.
We tackled the hard, daily neuroplastic work of replacing the demanding, hostile boss in our heads with the compassionate, oxytocin-releasing voice of a friend. We embraced the concept of subterranean growth, trusting that our hardest seasons are building the deep root systems of our future resilience. And finally, we arrived at the profound understanding of narrative identity, that our current difficulties are just one chapter in a much larger, unfolding, and unfinished story.
If there is one core takeaway from all the science, the psychology, and the metaphors we've discussed today, it is this. The urgency you feel to have everything figured out perfectly right now is an artificial, destructive pressure. Healing, growing, and becoming are not races to be won. They are complex, messy, beautiful experiences to be lived. I hope this discussion equips you with the understanding to finally lay down the weapons you've been using against yourself.
I think that is the perfect note to end on. But to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day, we just talked about how you shouldn't foreclose on your narrative by closing the book in the middle of a difficult chapter. The text ends by telling you that your story is still being written. If that is true, it means you are not just the main character enduring the plot, you are also the author. You are the narrator. You are the voice telling the story in your own mind. So what happens if you consciously decide, starting right now, today, to make the narrator of your story a deeply compassionate one rather than a harsh, cynical critic? How would reading through this current, messy, difficult chapter of your life change if the voice telling the story was actually rooting for you? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Be gentle with yourselves out there. Your roots are growing deeper than you know. We'll see you next time.